Hey everyone, welcome back. You guys know the drill. You shared your thoughts, and now we're diving deep. This time, it's all about that interview you sent, the one with Matthew Pines, Bitcoin War Games. Get ready, because this one takes us down some pretty intense rabbit holes.
It definitely does. Pines doesn't hold back. One of the first things that really jumped out at me was when he compared, like straight up compared what's happening in the world right now geopolitically to, get this, the years leading up to World War I, World War II, like those periods of massive global instability.
Intense, right?
Yeah, and he doesn't stop there. He takes it even further, talking about like a clash of civilizations, but hold on, he calls it a digital civilization. It's like he's saying tech isn't just a tool anymore, it's like the whole game, you
Yeah.
know? Totally. He's saying it's how societies work, how we talk to each other, even how we fight wars now, and the stakes way higher than ever before, according to Pines. He uses this crazy example. Picture this: a rusty old ship, barely holding together, stuck in the South China Sea. Doesn't sound like a big deal, right? Wrong.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
That ship, it's called the Sierra Madre, and it's a huge point of contention. The Philippines use it to claim territory, but China wants it gone. And just like that, you've got the potential for a major conflict, superpowers going head to head, and all over what seems like a nothing, a rusted hulk of metal.
It's like the world's most high-stakes game of chicken.
Exactly. And then he hits us with this other analogy. Are you ready for this? He compares global power structures, like big players on the world stage, to, wait for it, organized crime.
He called them mafias, didn't he? I remember thinking, where is he going with
He
this?
did, and it sounds kind of wild at first, but then he starts breaking it down. Groups like, he specifically points to the Chinese Communist Party, but even says some Western power structures operate with a similar playbook to, like the mafia, always vying for power, for resources, for control. It's all about strategy, playing the long game, and traditional rules.
Yeah, those don't always apply.
Which is especially unsettling when you think about how fast artificial intelligence is advancing. And Pines goes there. He uses the example of those cheap, mass-produced killer drones being used in Ukraine and suggests that this tech, it could become the norm. Like, imagine a world where any country, any group with enough resources has access to that kind of firepower. It's like he's saying warfare as we know it is about to change completely. Right. He actually compares it to, like, the race for nuclear weapons back in the Cold War, and that just creates more fear, more suspicion, because now any nation, even non-state actors, they could become major players in a conflict. It all ties back into that mafia analogy, this idea that the old rules are out the window.
It's a scary thought, and it makes you wonder, can the U.S. even keep up in this new world order? Can anyone?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And you guessed it, Pines has some pretty thought-provoking ideas about that, too.
So can the U.S. compete? I mean, Pines didn't seem too optimistic.
Yeah, and he actually digs into why. He points out this stark contrast in how the U.S. and China approach, well, pretty much everything: decision-making, long-term strategy, you name it. He says China, with their more centralized system, they're playing a completely different game. Like, they think decades ahead, while the U.S., he argues, gets stuck in these short-term cycles, election cycles.
Right, it's all about the next news cycle here.
Exactly. And Pines is like, that's a recipe for disaster when you're trying to counter a country like China that's thinking, strategizing for the long haul. But get this, it gets even more complicated, even more, I don't know, tangled when you bring in the whole economic side of things.
Yeah, because Pines seems pretty concerned about the U.S.'s, let's just say, reliance on debt. That came up a lot, right?
It did, and it's a big one. He points out that China owns a significant chunk of U.S. debt. Like, they're holding a lot of cards in this game.
Okay, I see where you're going with this, and it's making me a little nervous.
It's unnerving, right? And it gets back to that long game strategy Pines keeps talking about. It's like China's playing poker with a stack of U.S. chips. If that debt ever becomes an issue, well, let's just say the U.S. might be in a tough spot. But here's where it gets interesting. Pines throws out this curveball solution, a way for the U.S. to maybe, just maybe, get ahead in this whole thing, Bitcoin.
Okay, now that is interesting. For those of us who are, let's say, not quite up to speed on all things Bitcoin, can you break down how Pines sees this as a potential game changer?
Sure, it all comes down to decentralization. See, traditional currencies like the dollar, they're controlled by governments, central banks, right? But Bitcoin, it runs on this global network. No one entity is in control.
So no one country, no one person can just decide to, like, manipulate it.
That's the idea, at least how Pines explains it. It's like this kind of equalizer in the financial world, and he argues a smart play for the U.S. would be to lean into that.
So Pines is saying instead of being beholden to this, I don't know, potentially shaky system we've got now, the U.S. could leverage this new decentralized one.
Exactly. It's a way to diversify, maybe even gain an advantage down the line. Now, I have to say, this is one of those things people have really strong opinions about.
Totally. Some people think Bitcoin's the future. Others think it's, well, going to crash and burn. But even if you set aside Bitcoin specifically, the bigger point Pines is making, it's about finding ways to create a more stable world. And that seems like a pretty universal goal.
For sure. Who doesn't want more stability? But Pines doesn't sugarcoat it. He doesn't think some kind of perfect global harmony is just around the corner.
So is he saying it's hopeless? We're all just headed for, like, inevitable conflict?
Not exactly. He's saying it's complicated. He thinks a more stable world is possible, but it's going to take some, well, some tough conversations, some serious compromises. And one of the biggest hurdles he sees, that's the elephant in the room, Taiwan.
Ah, yeah, because that's the powder keg. It is. It feels like one wrong move and boom. Does Pines have any thoughts on, like, how this whole Taiwan situation might actually play out?
Oh, yeah, he definitely does. And while it's not exactly reassuring, he uses this phrase, pressure campaign, to describe what he thinks China's doing. Basically, they're turning up the heat little by little, seeing how far they can push, waiting to see if, or maybe when, the U.S. might back down.
So it's a game of chicken, but with, like, the fate of, well, a lot riding on it.
Exactly. And to really get what Pines is saying, think about it like a sports team, right? They're always going to push the limits of the rules, looking for any edge they can get. That's kind of how he sees China approaching this. Risky, for sure.
And then on top of all that, there's cyber warfare. It doesn't get as much attention, but Pine seems to think it's a huge deal.
Absolutely. He even says it might be the biggest threat, period. And he uses this example. It's, well, let's just say it's unsettling. This group, Chinese hackers, they call themselves Volt Typhoon, and they've managed to get into some really sensitive systems here in the U.S., power grids, transportation, that kind of stuff.
So if things went south, they could basically shut down, what, like half the country?
That's the fear. And the methods they're using, Pine says they're really sophisticated, hard to detect, even harder to stop, like a ticking time bomb is how he describes it.
It makes you realize this whole, New World Order thing, it's not just about armies and tanks anymore. It's way more complex than that.
Way more complex. And just when you thought it couldn't get any wilder, Pines throws in one more curveball. And this one's a big one.
Okay, hit me.
Non-human intelligence. He goes there.
Wait, he's talking about, like, UFOs, aliens.
He actually uses the term UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena. But yeah, he's suggesting that we might not be alone. And not just like, oh, there's something out there, but like, really not alone. Like, they've been here, they might still be here. He even hints at, like, secret government programs, recovered technology, the whole nine yards.
Hold on. Recovered technology, what does that even mean?
Pines doesn't go into specifics, but he implies that some of these UAPs, they've left something behind, and that whatever it is, it's so far beyond anything we can currently create that, well, let's just say people are freaking out a little bit.
Okay, I can see why they might keep that under wraps. But why so much secrecy in the first place? If it's real, why not just, tell everyone?
Pine's theory is that some people in the government, they're afraid. They think revealing this information, it could be like opening Pandora's box. Imagine the chaos, right? Religions, governments, everything we thought we knew turned upside down.
It's a lot to process. So where do we go from here? What are we supposed to do with all this information?
Honestly, I think that's the question Pines wants us to ask. We're in uncharted territory. The old playbooks, they don't apply anymore. He doesn't give us easy answers because, well, there might not be any.
That's both exciting and terrifying at the same time.
It is. It really is.
Well, there you have it. Our deep dive into the mind of Matthew Pines. It's a lot to think about, that's for sure. Thanks for coming along for the ride, and be sure to let us know your thoughts. Until next time.